Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Courtney. I'll be your host for today's webinar. Unfortunately, internet issues are keeping me from having my video on, but you can hopefully hear me okay, and I'll be on in the background to moderate today's session. Today, we are diving into an insider's look at Avalara's compliance suite. We're going to be doing an overview of how our tax automation services can help your business streamline tax management and deal with some of the biggest challenges of tax compliance. Before we dive in, though, just a couple of housekeeping items. So first, for legal purposes, a friendly reminder that Avalara cannot provide legal tax advice. Everything that we discuss today is for educational purposes only, but as always, we will do our best to provide answers as best we can. And then I'm also going to leave up our safe harbor statement for a moment while I continue with some additional housekeeping items. So as many of you, especially if you've attended our webinars in the past, we are recording today's presentation. So if you'd like to listen to it again or share it with a colleague, you'll receive a link to the recording within the next 24 hours. Next, let's go over the orange console that we're looking at. So all of those windows on there can be resized, so feel free to move them around, make them bigger or smaller, depending on your likes. There is a Q&A box over on the left-hand side of your screen that you can use to interact with us today. We will be responding to questions individually on the back end as we're able to through that box. And then we do have some time set aside at the end of the presentation for live Q&A with our speakers as well. So be sure to stick around for that. As I mentioned, we are not able to provide tax advice during the presentation today, but if you are interested in getting more individualized answers to your questions, there's also a box on the console over on the right-hand side where you could schedule a time to speak with one of Avalara's tax automation specialists. There, you can actually talk to someone individually about your tax obligations, and they can provide more insight on whether a tax automation solution like Avalara's could be the right fit for you. We also have some related resources and links available on the console if you're interested in learning more about the topics we're discussing today. That's also where you can download your own copy of today's presentation slides if you'd like to download them or just save them for later. And we've also added the ability new on the console for you to add reactions. So if you like something, dislike something, you can use those reactions to let us know how you're feeling. All right, so let's dive in and meet our speakers. So we have two wonderful speakers with us today, two of my wonderful colleagues here at Avalara. So first up is Christine Martin. She is a senior solutions consultant here at Avalara. Christine, it's great to work with you. Thank you for being here.
Thanks so much, Courtney. Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. I am glad to be able to present this to you guys. I have been in this sales and use tax space for more than 25 years. I spent many years in industry at places like Marriott Headquarters, Cable and Wireless, and Rock-10 before I made the jump over to Avalara. So it's great to be here, and I certainly hope you get an awful lot out of our conversation today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Christine. And next up, we have Cale Kelly. He is our General Manager of Exemption Certificates and Tax Research here at Avalara. Cale, always great to have you on a webinar.
Oh, thank you, Courtney. Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks, everyone, for taking time to join us. I don't have quite the tax street cred that Christine does, but I have been with Avalara for 10 years, going back to when it was a much smaller company. So I really enjoyed my journey here, and thanks, everyone, for joining.
Absolutely. Thank you both. So let me kick us off and go through the agenda of what we're going to be covering today. So we have identified several of some of the biggest tax challenges that companies face, from small businesses to larger enterprise companies. And we're going to be going over what those challenges are, what you need to know about them, and how Avalara's compliance suite can help you. So everything from understanding Nexus, exemption certificates, actually calculating tax, to cross-border commerce and more. And then we'll do an overview of Avalara's compliance suite, some of the products and services that we offer to help your business take the manual burden off of it. And then, like I said, we have time for Q&A at the end. So with that, I am going to pass it over to Christine to dive into what makes tax compliance so challenging.
Thanks so much, Courtney. So when I worked in industry, I know that there were so many more things that I thought about that weren't just the tax calculation piece of things. It was, how do I find my exemption certificates? What am I going to do about filing returns and paying those returns? I've got property tax that I need to be aware of. And did I get the bills? Did I get those returns filed? The consumer use tax piece. There's so much that you guys think about every single day. And that's really what makes this tax compliance piece so challenging. It's not just as simple as a tax return or a tax rate or a tax calculation. There's a whole bunch of things that we know you guys are thinking about every single day when you come to work, and maybe even when you go home, when you're realizing, oh, I forgot about those promotional items with my consumer use tax. And this is really what we're going to talk about today, is all of these challenges and where Avalara fits in to help you with those challenges.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot to handle, for anyone, tax, finance, and so forth. And so what Avalara has done, to your point, Christine, is put together a compliance suite. And let me take a little bit of time and just go over the suite at a high level, and then we're going to dig into various challenges around tax compliance, tie that to how Avalara's compliance suite can help, and then connect all the dots at the end. So just in kind of conceptualizing, what is it that Avalara offers? Your business, and really fundamental to any business, there are two main parts of the equation of what any business does. It buys things from vendors and it sells to customers. And when Avalara put its compliance suite together, it's framed it around how to stay compliant on the buy side, in procure to pay, on the sell side, in AR, and quote to cash. And even moving up prior to that, when a business is either starting, or let's say that you're moved into a new jurisdiction, or acquired a company, or what have you, you need to make sure that you're registered in that jurisdiction in the US, and that you're fully licensed to do business. And now you may find yourself in certain situations a little bit further down that path, in the sense that maybe you already established Nexus and didn't realize it, or you didn't register in a jurisdiction. And in that case, you want to make sure that you understand what those liabilities might be, address them, and consider a voluntary disclosure option. And then to Christine's point, you may have that you need to be compliant around. You may have physical property or leases, or personal property inside a space that you lease, and you need to be compliant there. And so Avalara has a licenses and registration product that not only registers you licenses, but it will help you manage licenses on an ongoing basis. We have a sales tax risk assessment that we'll spend a little bit more time around, that'll help you understand what your product taxability, liability, and Nexus looks like. And then we have a relatively new property tax product that's very robust to help you stay compliant in that area as well. And now let's move to the sell side. So you're selling to customers, you need to calculate tax, and you need to take into consideration rates, boundaries, product taxability, and make sure that calculation is accurate. Some of your customers might buy tax exempt, so you need to be able to prove to the state that you didn't need to collect and remit tax, and those exemption certificates expire, so they need to stay up to date. You need to file and remit taxes, and then potentially send invoices electronically, particularly if you're doing business abroad. There are many e-invoicing requirements that are rising on that governments are mandating. And then there are some supporting roles or areas that can help underlie this. So again, tax is very complex. You might need to research product taxability, rates, rules, and so forth. If you're doing business abroad, you want to make sure that your products are classified properly for customs duties. You may want to have those duties calculated at the time of invoice and paid for in advance, as opposed to having the buyer pay for them once they're landed, which is a better customer experience. And then there are times that you maybe need to collect tax forms from customers. And so we have a set of supporting products: tax research, item classification, a cross-border suite, and then a 1099 and W-9 solution. Switching over to the buy side, the vendor side, how do you stay compliant in your purchases? So you've either been charged tax or you haven't. And so kind of the to-do there when you make that purchase, the to-do there is to verify or approve those taxes around that purchase. You may have the opportunity to buy tax exempt. So you need to be able to send exemption certificates that are updated, easy to access and so forth to your vendors and potentially do that at scale. Again, you have to file and remit taxes, and then you may need to receive invoices electronically as well. And then again, a number of supporting functions. You want to make sure that to verify that the products that you're purchasing have been classified properly. You may want to need to verify the customs charges. That's something that's coming in our suite. Again, you have questions about on the purchase side around product taxability and so forth. And then you may have vendors or other sorts of payments made to non-W-2 employees where you need to collect a W-9 form and then submit 1099s. And again, we have that set of core products, AvaTax, or exemption certificate management product, our returns and reporting product, e-invoicing, live reporting, and then the supporting products that you see below. So we'll come back to this suite. We have some other elements that sort of tie it all together, but at a high level, it's making sure that you're compliant in both the procurement process end-to-end and the purchase process. So let's dig in a little bit, as Courtney and Christine alluded to, around some of these challenges with tax compliance. And the first challenge really comes around with knowing your nexus. And nexus refers to a connection. So it's a connection between a government body and a taxing authority and your company or organization. And if you meet certain criteria or surpass certain thresholds, then you're required to register in that state and either remit taxes or collect an exemption certificate showing that you didn't have to remit taxes and then file a tax return. So what qualifies as nexus? The short answer is there's a lot, it's very complex, and it varies state to state. And maybe kind of an easy way to think about this is starting in 1992, one big bucket of nexus, and it's not the only one, but it's a big one, is physical nexus. And states based nexus primarily on a physical location of a business. But then states over time wanted to expand this. I mean, they need the tax revenue, and they sort of started to look for other ways to generate that revenue. So they expanded that definition, and again, it varies by state, but to things like if a remote employee is in that state, if there are field services in that state, if a company conducts trade shows in that state, if there's one of my favorites, if there's an investor or board of directors meeting in that state, that would establish nexus typically for a year. There's other categories like affiliate nexus, if there are affiliates in a state, but that was generally all under the category, or mostly under the category of physical nexus. There were 9 states that said, hey, we're kind of beyond physical nexus in the digital age and the world of the internet. And 9 states passed their own laws that said, if a company does business above a certain point, that qualifies as nexus. And that's referred to as economic nexus. Economic nexus was challenged, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court. In 2018, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the state of South Dakota that had an economic nexus law, and ruled in their favor. An economic nexus became more or less the law of the land. Every state that had charges sales tax adopted an economic nexus law, and sort of by on a de facto basis, Alaska did as well. Alaska does not have a sales tax, but over 100 municipalities adopted economic nexus laws. So this is a map of the economic nexus thresholds by state, and a couple of things stand out. I mean, first, there is variability, but sometimes it's mostly based on the number of sales, but sometimes it's based on a combination of sales and transactions, or just the number of transactions as an alternative. So if we look at, for instance, the light orange, my takeaway is that, especially in the B2B space, this is not a particularly high threshold. I mean, if a large sale or two, or if a supplier is selling, say, $100,000 piece of equipment, pretty easy to pass that economic nexus threshold. And then conversely, again, thinking about the B2B space, a company might sell a relatively inexpensive good like fasteners, for instance, but it's not very hard to accumulate 200 transactions. So again, it varies, but generally it's not that hard to pass that threshold. And if you combine that with physical nexus and all the other forms of nexus, it becomes very complex. So what's our recommendation? Well, we're going to come to that, but first, I'm going to turn it back over to Courtney for a quick poll. Or did we lose
Yeah,
Courtney?
Nope,
Okay,
I'm
sorry.
still here, hopefully.
Okay. You're good.
So we do have just a quick poll that's going to show up on your screen today. We are not offering CPE credit for today's presentation, so this is purely optional. But if you'd like to share what industry you're in, we would love to have that information and then be able to tailor some of our talking points to that. So this will stay up on the screen. I'm going to go ahead and move us on to the next slide. But if you'd like to participate in the poll, go ahead.
Great. So
Great.
Our recommendation is that, thank you. Our recommendation is that you double check your sales tax obligations. And we have what we refer to as a premium sales tax risk assessment. It's about an 80-question questionnaire plus 5 years of invoice data that you submit. We return a 60 to 80-page report. It'll show where you have nexus, when nexus was created, or service taxability by state, and what liabilities you may have incurred from unreported tax, interest, and penalties. So that's the sales tax risk assessment. Again, it's a great place to start if you're either moving into the U.S. for the first time, you're expanding your business, you've acquired companies, or you're just growing and you're not sure. Let's move on to challenge number 2, and that's around exemption certificate management. And when you're selling products and you have buyers that are tax exempt or claiming an exemption. And Nexus is a good segue around this. If we look at the challenges around exemption certificates, the first one really is Nexus, and it's a part of Nexus that we found is really not well understood. And it's not well understood because so many companies think that it's only taxable transactions that create Nexus. And so let's debunk that myth right away. There are a couple states where tax exempt transactions don't count toward Nexus, but in the vast majority of states they do. So we talk to companies all the time that didn't realize they had crossed Nexus thresholds, and they're in a situation where they've accumulated liability. So tax exempt transactions, as a general rule, do apply, and you may establish Nexus. The second challenge, and it's kind of two wrapped up into one here, but it used to be that when these exemption certificate forms, and again, just to back up, the whole purpose behind this exemption certificate is to say, if you've established Nexus, you need to prove to the state that you did not have to collect and remit tax. And that proof is the exemption certificate. And it used to be that those interactions tended to be an in-person interactions through a manufacturer's rep or a branch office or a contact center or what have you. But especially since the pandemic, so much of B2B business has gone online. And so you as a seller need to meet customers where they are, and you need to be able to collect valid, accurate exemption certificates, whether it's at the point of sale, a vendor portal, or a buyer portal, a B2B portal, just a regular online website, a call center, whatever that might be. And what we found over time is that there are over 1,000 different types of these certificates. Again, a lot of variation by state and by jurisdiction, even within states. And there's a lot of variability in these forms. And if one or two lines are missed or not filled out appropriately, or it's not signed, or you don't have a tax ID number, then the certificate is invalid. But it's hard to understand, whether a certificate is valid or not. And we're going to revisit that point. So there's a challenge there. And it's even more of a challenge when you have a distributed group. It's one thing if you always have the same, tax department or people in accounting or AR collecting these certificates, but if you have people at the point of sale, or again, sales reps and so forth, it's more challenging. And then, to make it doubly challenging, these certificates expire. Some don't expire at all. Some are only for a one-time purchase. Some, like the Florida resale certificate, expire every year. So being able to track and understand, do you have all the certificates and are they up to date, and getting them up to date can be a challenge. Retrieving the certificates can be a challenge as well. There are a lot of customers that, again, they don't know what form to send in. They'll either send the wrong one, or they'll send something like a W-9 or a business license, thinking that's what's required. If in the case of audit, if you find that there are certificates that are expired or missing, then it's really a scramble to try to go recover those certificates. Keep in mind, these audits can go back multiple years. If a company changes their legal name, or if they go out of business, you'll never get the certificate back, and it's proven to be a challenge in hearing from our customers about just collecting those. So we have to be able to address that. And then a missing certificate can cost you a lot. I'll give you a quick example. Let's say that there's a big order, again, in the B2B space for $50,000, big piece of equipment sold. In the case of the state of Washington, let's say that there's a blended tax rate, local and state tax of 8%. The penalties, if you don't have a valid certificate and you didn't charge tax, are 1.5 times the tax rate. So that would be 12%. So you put those two together on a $50,000 purchase, you could be liable for $10,000. So that one certificate, that one PDF form, or and so forth, could be worth $10,000. And it just goes from there. They all add up. So Avalara has a product called ECM. There's 3 different versions of it: Essentials, Pro, and Premium, depending on the needs of the customer. And our vision is to automate all the manual steps in collecting and managing those certificates, make sure they're accurate. So you need to have valid certificates to make sure that your tax return is accurate, and make sure that you're ready in case of an audit, and then be able to handle that omni-channel situation where to collect certificates online or at a point of sale or what have you. And so the way the product works, it makes it easy to request certificates. You can do that via an email link, embedded in a website, or at a point of sale. We use something called Cert Express, which is essentially a web portal. In using the web portal, we guide customers to select the right certificate and make sure it's completely filled out, so it increases the likelihood of validation. We also have things like optical character recognition that's based on machine learning, and a validation agent to help you make sure that that certificate is valid. And then we help keep the certificates up to date. The product will surface the customers that are missing certificates, and when certificates have expired, you can actually configure the system to automatically reach out to customers when certificates are expiring. And then you can run campaigns based on any number of criteria, and the campaign just refers to that automated outreach via email or postal mail to retrieve certificates. And then we have reports at the ready to do analysis, and also make sure you're prepared for audits. And then just a quick deeper dive with ECM. So it integrates with Avatax, our calculation engine that Christine will talk about shortly. It also integrates with third-party engines. There are APIs available as well. Again, we collect those certificates digitally. They can be managed by any number of variables, such as the customer, the state, purchase order, and so forth. They're all stored securely, and we automate those expiration notices, as I mentioned. And we also have professional services, or what we call managed services, that will help you collect those certificates or take old certificates, even in paper, and get them into the system when the system is set up. Helps you respond to audits quickly. And then we have an extensive reference library built in of exemption certificate laws to make sure that you're compliant. So those are the first couple of challenges. Now I'm going to turn it over.
Can I jump in real quick and talk about this? Because I think this is so, if we think about the very first challenge of Nexus, and then you layer on top of that the exemption certificate piece, imagine, Kale, what's going to happen with somebody that now has Nexus in a state, but they haven't collected any of those exemption certificates in that state.
Yeah,
that's a challenge in itself.
We talk to companies every day, as you well know, Christine. You probably talk to them as well, that are in that exact situation. Okay, Christine, why don't you take it away, and let's talk about how do we make sure that the right amount of tax is calculated.
Got it. Thanks, Kale. I appreciate it. So we're kind of building on this nexus piece and the exemption certificate piece as we keep going downstream to these various challenges. So we're going to talk about calculating the right tax amount. So you guys know it would be silly if every single state had the same rate and taxed things the same way. I wouldn't have had a job for the last 25 years or so. Years ago, states tried to make it easier by creating this streamlined sales tax project where states got together, not all states, but some states got together and they said, hey, let's make it easier for people to comply and let's standardize not the rate, but the definitions of things. And it's kind of funny to think about now, but they spent a lot of time talking about the definition of candy because Tootsie Rolls didn't necessarily fit the definition of candy originally. Not every state took into this streamlined sales tax project, but those states that are members have similar definitions of things, which makes it easier. But now we've got 13,000 tax jurisdictions, and that's just for sales tax. If you think about communications taxes, restaurant taxes, telecommunications taxes, liquor taxes, lodging taxes, there's probably double that number of jurisdictions. There are so many things out there, so many jurisdictions that want a piece of every transaction. So retailers also have to think about tax holidays. So one, they've got these jurisdictions that they've got to understand. There's rates that they have to understand, rules, but now throw in the tax holiday piece of it too, really becomes a challenge. So this challenge behind tax calculation also stems from what Kale has been talking about previously with this Nexus challenge. Because of the Wayfair decision, more companies are now required to collect in more states. Collecting in more states means you've got to know all of the tax rates, all of the tax rules. When I started my career, we didn't have an automated system like this, and we had a group of 10 people that monitored taxability. We monitored tax rates. We had a law library, and I laugh that we talk about the onion paper, and I would go in and pull the Texas book and start researching taxability, and we had an admin that changed the pages every day. But that's what we did. And thankfully, now we're in this 21st century where we've got tools that you can utilize like Avalara that can help with these tax calculations so that you're not spending all of this time doing research. So what does Avalara look like? I can simplify this by saying, hey, Avalara is going to take these transactions and it's going to assign a jurisdiction, what the source is for that jurisdiction. You know, there's some states that look at origination, there's some states that look at destination, there's some states like California and Texas that look at both. There's that jurisdiction assignment, the product taxability, and then the reporting piece of it. So this is just kind of a simplified version of what the Avalara AvaTax engine does. But if I take you down this sub-second challenge, and I say it's a sub-second challenge because what I'm going to walk through with you here is what Avalara does in less than a second, which to me is just absolutely mind-blowing. Somebody is buying something, right? They're going to hit that purchase button. They're going to call somebody and place their order. The very first thing that Avalara does is it's validating that address to a correct address. And we're doing that for a couple different reasons. One, we're going to assign a jurisdiction based on the street level address, not the city, state, and zip. My old address in Georgia, Swanee, Georgia 30024, happens to be in 3 different counties with 3 different tax rates. So if you're using a zip code, how do you know which one is the right one? That's why Avalara is using that street level address to be able to assign a jurisdiction based on a latitude and longitude. You don't have to know the latitude and longitude. We convert addresses to latitude and longitude. But there's also a secondary benefit to this address validation. FedEx and UPS charge about $20 every time they have to change an address because it's incorrect. Well, if we're validating that address, you should see a reduction in the cost for charges from FedEx and UPS. So the first thing we're doing, validating an address. Once we've validated that address, we're then applying those sourcing rules. Is it origination? Is it destination? Is it a combination of both, like California and Texas? Now, once we've decided what those sourcing rules are, we're assigning those jurisdictions to that transaction. Once we've assigned the jurisdiction, we're then looking for the exemption status. Is there an exemption certificate for that customer in that state for those products that are being purchased that's valid and not expired? And even in states like California that have partial exemptions for manufacturing, we're capturing that as well. If there's no exemptions, or if an exemption has expired, then we're looking at the taxability of the products. And again, it's taking out you having to know how those items are taxable. We're doing that on our side. We're also looking to see if those items are part of the tax holiday. Again, based on the date that it's being purchased, what is being purchased, we know whether or not those items would qualify. And then we're applying the right rules, the right rates to those transactions. And we're sending that tax back to the source system, whether it's an e-commerce shopping cart, whether it's your ERP, whatever it may be. All of this is done in less than a second. Even 14 years later, I find this to be just absolutely amazing at how this works and how fast it works. We're also storing all of those transactional pieces of information for a couple things. One, we're storing it so that we can do the tax returns for you, or you can do them yourself. But going back to that Nexus challenge, that very first challenge that Kale talked about, is we're also giving you some information to say, hey, you're approaching economic nexus based on all of these transactions that we've seen, or you've exceeded economic nexus. So there's some added value in capturing all of these transactions as well. Let's talk about consumer use tax. If we thought sales tax was hard, consumer use tax to me is so much harder. And to me, this is probably, next to the Nexus piece of things, probably one of the bigger challenges. Because one, I've got to look at all of these invoices that I'm getting from my vendors. Did they charge me tax? If they didn't charge me tax, should they have charged me tax? If they charged me tax, was it the right rate? And if it's not the right rate, then I need to calculate and accrue that consumer use tax myself. The rules for consumer use tax are just as complicated as sales tax. And the integration piece really becomes an issue too, because now I've got to look at consumer use tax from multiple lenses: the accounts payable side, the inventory transfer side, things that are given away, purchasing cards. Anybody here that's ever spent any time with purchasing cards knows what a pain that is when it comes to consumer use tax. But the risks for consumer use tax, to me, are much higher than the sales tax side. Every audit that I ever went through with the companies that I had worked for, most of those auditors spent their time looking at consumer use tax. That's the big money. If we think about fixed assets and the dollar value associated with fixed assets and how complicated it is with fixed assets, that's really where the money is, and that's where the auditors spend an awful lot of their time. So what Avalara has done is we've created a product called Avalara AvaTax for accounts payable. And what we're doing is we're trying to help you identify, one, if your vendors have overcharged you, maybe that triggers you to short pay that invoice. Or maybe you call them and say, I don't understand the tax on this bill. But we're also recognizing when your vendors have undercharged you. And you've got this ability to be able to accrue that tax, expensing that tax expense but then also having it show up with the rest of your sales tax transactions so that you can report them on the returns correctly. In many instances, this is a real-time calculation. If you think about going into accounts payable and you're trying to process the bill, you're not relying on your accounts payable people to know whether or not what they're processing should have been taxable or not. Avalara can say, hey, the vendor didn't charge you tax. Do you want to accrue that tax? And then there's some review that's available in there. But all of this can be done within real time. And what we're doing is creating a single location that you can view these variances, act on those variances, and then report on those variances in this single Avalara portal itself. And it works with our AvaTax engine and with other ERPs as well. So we've got this real-time capability, but some folks don't necessarily want it to be real-time. So we've also given people the ability to import transactions and look at transactions rather than through the accounts payable lens, but maybe importing transactions of things that are given away or things that have been moved out of inventory. So a couple different pieces of the consumer use tax life cycle are all managed within this AvaTax for accounts payable. So we've got this ability to efficiently, through the use of rules and thresholds, allow your system to calculate this consumer use tax based on a threshold, right? If there is a difference in tax due based on what AvaTax has calculated that's below a certain threshold, you don't want to have to review if there's a 25-cent difference. You can set the threshold so that it just automatically accrues. Maybe you're buying software that's used across multiple jurisdictions. You can set up these allocations that when it's software that's purchased, allocate 20% to this address, 20% to this address, and 60% to this address. So you're not having to export this information, put it into an Excel spreadsheet. You can do it systematically within AvaTax for AP by using this allocation feature. And it's going to automatically accrue that tax for you. So we've talked about Nexus, the exemption certificates, sales tax, the consumer use tax, but what do we do with all of this tax that we've calculated and those Nexus thresholds that we've met? Now I have to file those returns. And filing and remitting the tax to the tax authorities can be pretty challenging. Again, if I go back to my days when I first started, we had 10 people that did nothing but put numbers into spreadsheets, filed tax returns, and went to the post office to mail these tax returns. We think about having to gather all of this information and then understanding all of the state's requirements for filing. Every state may have a different due date, right? I think about Washington. The Washington monthly return is due on the 20th, but the quarterly returns and the annual returns are due on the last day of the month. How are you keeping track of all of that when you're filing in more and more states because of economic nexus, that first challenge we talked about? There's some states that give you multiple ways to pay. You can pay electronically, you can pay by check. Most states now allow you to file returns electronically, but there's still some local jurisdictions that require you to file by paper. So who's going to the post office? What happens when Mary goes on vacation? Who's taking care of all of these things? There is so much to think about when it comes to the filing and the remittance of the tax. I also think about the aggregation of data. So many of our customers have acquired other companies or they've got multiple systems. And rather than having a single source of truth for data, they're having to pull in data from 2, 3, 4, 5 different sources, putting them into Excel spreadsheets, and then organizing that information in such a way that they can prepare those tax returns. An old CIO that I worked with years ago said, humans are bad, humans make mistakes. Anytime a human gets involved, there is a propensity for an error. So we like this ability to be able to automate it, to take that human piece out of it. Aggregating data, you've got to be able to pull out the information to be able to do a California tax return. Prior to our webinar, I was on the phone with some folks that said, hey, I've got to do this California return. I've got these crazy crystal reports. Can you guys do this any better? Well, sure we can. So this aggregation of data and getting it into a format that you can file returns really becomes a challenge. So if we think about where Avalara comes in to help with this challenge, we've got over 1,000 jurisdictional forms. They are the latest forms. We're monitoring those due dates, when they're due, how they're paid, how they're filed, all of the quarterly information. You're not having to import anything on the quarter. We've got every transaction and we know when it gets reported on a tax return. We're taking those timely filing discounts so that you get the benefit of those discounts just as you would if you were doing those returns on your own. But think of the outsourcing of sales and use tax returns similar to payroll. Most companies that I talk with are outsourcing their payroll. This is no different. We're taking on the burden of filing those tax returns on time. If we don't file those tax returns on time, that's our issue to deal with. We're making sure that all of those returns are meeting those mandatory filing requirements, whether it's being paid electronically or filed electronically. If there's any changes on the website, you don't have to worry about how to get your information onto a website to file the returns. Our folks are doing that as well. And then at the end of the month, all of those returns that we filed on your behalf and those pro forma returns that we've used to file those returns are available on a website for you. So let's talk about the cross-border challenge. And again, we've talked an awful lot about US with Nexus, again, the exemption certificates, the sales tax calculation, the consumer use tax calculation. Let's kind of transition over to non-US piece of things. There is a huge challenge in classifying items. So if you think about, I've got this leather shoe that I am going to ship out. Somebody in your shipping and receiving department has to know how to classify that item based on where it's going to, right? No two countries have the exact same classification codes. And maybe it's not just a leather shoe, maybe the upper is leather and the lower is leather, and that changes the code. So this challenge of classifying goods before they're shipped out so they don't get stuck in customs really becomes important as well. But you also have to understand what's restricted by company or by country. So if I'm shipping something to a foreign country, I have to know whether or not that foreign country is going to allow it to come into their country. There's a whole bunch of things that many countries have said, we don't allow this to be shipped here. How are you guys doing that? Who's doing that? Or are you just shipping things regardless of understanding those rules? And then lastly in this challenge is calculating those duties and taxes, which if you think about what's happening when somebody's buying online and they're going to have it shipped over to the EU, they may see that they're going to pay $25 for this item, but once it comes to their door, there's a whole bunch of duties and fees that they need to pay. But now those duties and fees exceed the cost of what it is that they were buying, and they reject it. So the challenge for me in this cross-border world that we live in now, with more and more companies selling across the world, is being able to classify those items correctly so they don't get stuck in customs, understanding import and export restrictions, and then being able to calculate that tax so that you've got a good customer experience. So how does Avalara solve this problem? Well, we know that there is a customer experience that's involved with abandoned shopping carts. If they get on and see $25, but they don't know the total cost of that item, they may abandon their shopping cart because they just don't know the total cost of buying this item. There may be products that are stuck in customs because of those classifications were incorrect. I think about the holidays, and people buy things so that they have it in time for the holiday, but maybe it was coded incorrectly and the item gets stuck in customs and it's going to sit there. Again, now we've got an issue with customer satisfaction. Maybe they give you a bad review because they never got their product in time for the holidays. Or the wrong HS code was put on it, and maybe the duties and the fees are higher. All of this just leads to a bad customer experience. So what we're trying to do is solve that bad customer experience to be able to give you an offering that covers all of those things, knowing those government restrictions, helping you classify those items that are being shipped all across the world, being able to do real-time duties and calculations, duty and fee calculations at the time of purchase, so that no one is surprised when it shows up at their door and they have to buy something. And being able to support this all across the globe. So what we have put together is this seamless global solution of registrations, classification, the calculations of those VATs, duties and fees, the trade treaty support so that you're not shipping things to a country that don't allow it. Electronic invoicing, that's been a really big topic lately. Being able to file and remit all of that VAT tax that you've billed, offering fiscal representation, and then being able to manage all of this documentation for you as well. There's going to be another poll that shows up for you on the sidebar. So if you get a few minutes, please take a chance to answer those for us also. So the last challenge that we have is on e-invoicing and live reporting. Many countries are trying to modernize their economy by becoming more efficient and reduce tax avoidance and fraud. And with this whole modernization comes digital reporting tax obligations and electronic invoicing models with governments and tax authorities. You know, I think of these countries almost like the United States, right? We've got our own separate rules by state. Well, these countries also have their own rules by states as well. So let's talk about what do we mean by digital reporting and e-invoicing and what's the difference between them. Live reporting means an immediate tax reporting at the point of transaction to a jurisdiction. Electronic invoicing is a way of billing in countries with electronic invoicing functions, maybe combined with live reporting as well. Live reporting may be part of electronic invoicing. It may be part of a separate system as well. But really, we have seen an uptick, and you'll see from 2014 to 2021, the number of countries that are now requiring this type of electronic reporting and electronic invoicing. And just like here in the United States, how do I manage all of these changes and which countries are doing what? That's really where Avalara is coming in, because we know which countries require electronic invoicing, which countries require live reporting, and there may be different mechanisms for this live reporting as well. So all of that information is stored within the Avalara service. So what we've put together is seamless. It's boosting your ability to provide invoices, selling to your customers, collecting from your customers with a seamless integration instead of having to have multiple services. Keep in mind with live reporting, there's a couple different services, a couple different ways to get this live reporting done. Wouldn't it be nice if you only had to have one provider do that for you instead of having to implement for multiple things? This becomes this single source of truth for all of your tax compliance, whether it's United States, whether it's global. We're supporting 60 different countries for e-invoicing with our folks that are tax experts in this area. And this becomes scalable as well, because now I don't have to put in multiple solutions in place Just by using the Avalara service and our integrations, we know how to quickly send information where it needs to be based on the rules and regulations of each country. And here we've got this visual of what e-invoicing looks like. And you'll notice, to me, Avalara is like the center of the universe. It's the sun, where these transactions come from your ERP system, right? And you're trying to get an invoice out to your customers. It may go through the tax authority to have tax validated. That invoice may go to the tax authority for your business partner to pick up. There's so many different variations of this depending on the country. But if you'll see here, Avalara has everything under control, right? We know how to get those electronic invoices to your business partners, how to get them to your customers, how to get them to the tax authorities for live reporting, and so that you can get paid quicker. I want to make sure that we leave some time for questions, but I'm going to hand this off to Kale to talk about our compliance suite, and hopefully we'll have a few minutes at the end for some questions.
Oh, that was terrific, Christine. Wow, that was really amazing. Yeah, let's just do a quick recap. And so we talked about how the Avalara Compliance Suite helps you stay compliant on the buy side in your purchases and the sell side in selling your goods and services to customers. And we did this deeper dive in the core products that you see in green, as well as a number of the supporting products as well that support the core and help you handle various compliance use cases. And then layered sort of beneath that are our integrations. And so we're at over 1,200 integrations strong to various software in the ERP space, CRM, e-commerce, marketplaces, point of sale, billing, and so forth. We also have some flexible APIs. So we make sure that we meet you where you are in terms of your processes, your tech stack, and we make sure that everything is automated and integrated with your current workflows. And we also have a number of services that assist as well. So Dean talked a little bit about streamlined sales tax. It's really more of a program than a service, but if you explore that, you may be able to save a significant amount of money in calculation and returns in those streamlined sales tax states. We spoke about the sales tax risk assessment. We also have implementation, training, and support services as well. And then finally, we have a number of services that we offer that are specific to products. So for instance, in the exemption certificate management space, we have what we refer to as managed services that help you set up the system. So take kind of all your existing certificates, validate them, get them in the system, and then we offer that service on an ongoing basis to collect and validate certificates as an option. So really, we used to have this tagline around here. We help make taxes less taxing, more relaxing. And if you think, back to Christine's first slide about everything that you have on your minds and as finance, accounting, and tax, we really try to ease that burden. And there's the business side of, hey, what is the economic impact? What's the ROI? How do I justify purchasing a product or combination of products or the whole suite from Avalara? And Christine, we did a really interesting work, or actually Forrester Research did some interesting work. Why don't I turn it over to you to kind of speak to that and this report that has that's just come out.
Thank you, Kale. So Forrester has done a study where they have reached out to customers trying to understand this economic impact on a business when they're using Avalara. And what we saw was really mind-blowing, not just the number of hours that are being saved, but the dollars that are being saved as well. So anything from the number of hours that are saved because they've outsourced the filing of tax returns, or the reduction in audit exposure by using a service like Avalara, or the efficiency that they've gained by having a tool like Avalara Tax Research. It's really an amazing study, and this return on investment calculator that Forrester put together as well. So we're having a webinar on April 18th with the Forrester folks about this study that they put together and everything that they learned as part of this study and what they heard from our customers. So I would love to have you join us. I think it will be very helpful for you to understand really this total impact that Avalara has. Most people think it's just about the savings of researching the rates or the rules, but it really has a much broader impact on the business from all of the different departments that are involved in everything that Avalara does. So it'll be a great webinar with the Forrester folks talking about their study and what they've learned and what they heard from our customers. So please join us April 18th.
Yep, absolutely. So we'll have the email invitations going out for that webinar soon. But if you also want to keep an eye on avalara.com/webinars, that's where our most recent webinars are listed, and we'll have that registration page up soon. But thank you, Christine and Cale, for jumping in here. This was a fantastic presentation. I'm going to continue to keep my video off, so hopefully you guys can hear me okay still. We did have a couple of questions. So one of the first questions that I wanted to ask you both is, when is the right time for a business to think about automation? Is there a certain kind of golden moment where it makes the most sense, or any insight you can offer on that?
I'll go first on that one, Cale. And I'll tell you my answer for most things is it depends, right? I think about if you're acquiring a company and now you've got multiple systems that you're having to manage, that's a great time to automate things. Not just from a tax calculation perspective, but being able to collect new exemption certificates. If you've got some pending audits, it's a great time to automate the exemption certificate piece because I want to get ahead of everything that auditor is going to ask me. Those are two that come to mind that I think are great triggers on when to automate. But really, to me, any time is a great time to automate because, again, back to that CIO that I work for, humans are bad. Humans make mistakes. If you take the human element out of it, then there's going to be less exposure, right? Because it's an automated system that is doing the same thing over and over again, transaction after transaction.
Yeah, we've often said too that no company really gains additional value by being compliant. I mean, compliance is a regulatory requirement. You want to do it with an efficient and least costly way as possible, and automation just helps you get there.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. I did see a question that came in on drop shipping. I know drop shipping can be very complex, depends on the business. I don't know if there was anything else that you want to talk about to others that are listening in about drop shipping.
I saw that question. Just really briefly, it's a great question, and Christine, you might have a short summary, but generally, there's three parties involved in drop shipping. There's someone selling to an end consumer, and there's someone essentially in a resale mode. And so someone has to charge tax typically, and one party has to collect an exemption certificate. And it's very complex. We have some great resources at avalara.com, both white paper, blogs, webinars devoted to it. So I would recommend, taking a look at those resources and seeing what the situation, how the situation applies to your business specifically, because some of it depends on which party has nexus. But anyway, go ahead, Christine.
Well, I was going to say that to me, drop shipment is like the Bermuda Triangle of sales tax because it depends. One of the three people involved in drop shipping owes tax, right? Is it the person selling to the consumer? Maybe. Is it the person selling to the retailer? Maybe. Maybe neither one of the seller or the distributor have nexus, and it's then on the consumer to accrue that consumer use tax. But this is like the definition of depends for me. It literally is this Bermuda Triangle of sales tax. Fortunately, because of the Wayfair decision, more and more people are required to register to collect tax. So it's not as onerous and as horrible as it used to be before Wayfair, because more and more people are registered and can give resale certificates. But it really is a tough one.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe we can take time for just one more. I saw a question that was asked a little bit earlier on how or can Avalara help you set up the back end of your accounting software? So it looks like this person was specifically asking about mapping and tax codes. But maybe you can both talk a little bit about just what it looks like to get Avalara up and running and how we can help our customers get that set up.
Christine, maybe you could kick off that one.
Sure. So Avalara is not going to help you set up your general ledger, but if you've got a new ERP that you are setting up, think about what goes into setting up the taxability and the tax schedules within that ERP. That's really where Avalara comes in. You're not having to create a whole bunch of tax schedules. You're basically saying, hey, bypass the native functionality of this ERP and call the Avalara service. And you don't have to know the taxability of all of those products all across the world. It's going to Avalara. There is some setup on the Avalara side where you have to create this relationship between what it is that you're selling, and we call them tax codes. These Avalara tax codes, if you think about a matrix, we have a code for software as a service, and we know how it's taxed all across the world. You're just creating a relationship between your items, software as a service, and that Avalara tax code. As those transactions leave your source system, remember that sub-second challenge? As it leaves that source system, it's calling Avalara. We're validating an address, we're assigning a jurisdiction, we're looking for an exemption, we're looking at that tax code that you've associated to that item, calculating tax and sending it back. So we don't help with setting up the ERP itself. We'll help with setting up the tax component of that ERP, because like Kale said at the very beginning, there's a buyer side and a seller side. You've got to be able to invoice your customers so that you can make money, right? That's where Avalara comes in on that tax calculation. But then we're also helping on the buy side so that you're paying all of the right tax or accruing that consumer use tax.
And I might just add that we do have professional services to help with the setup portion that Christine mentioned. However, we also have hundreds of Avalara certified implementation partners. So if you do need something more including ERP setup and things along that line, we do have partners out there.
That's a great point. Yeah, that's a great point, Kale.
And they can help with a wide range of both tax and tax technology challenges.
Great. All right, wonderful. Well, I think that's all the time that we have. Appreciate everyone who stuck around with us and listened to what we had to share today. Hopefully you found some valuable tidbits. Just a couple of call outs before we end today's session. If you are interested in learning more about Avalara, whether or not it's a good solution for you or even scheduling a demo, go ahead and click on that Book Now button over on the right-hand side of the console where you can schedule a time to speak to one of our specialists. As both Kale and Christine alluded to, a lot of our services are very specific and personal to your business. So it's always best to set up a kickoff call to help us understand what you're looking for, and then we can guide you in the right direction on how we can help with that. We also have some other links available on the console. You will have access to this console after the webinar is done. So if you didn't get a chance to click on anything that you want to, you will have access to this and can access all of those related resources in the slides afterward. And we also have a quick post-webinar survey that will pop up once we're done here. If you have any feedback to share, have any additional questions, or even want to share some other topics that you would be interested in hearing us present on, you can use that feedback form. I always look at the responses to that and appreciate any feedback that you have. So a final thank you to Christine and Kale. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your wonderful knowledge of Avalara's products and services. And we will see you all for one of our future webinars. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for joining, everybody. Thank you, Courtney.